Hey there, friends. David Paulides, CanAm Missing Project. That's the executive producer, Huckleberry. Yes, she's a Great Pyrenees, in case you wanted to know. Great Pyrenees are known for being stubborn, barking for no reason, being very lovable, but also being very protective. So, if you brought over some small kids, Huck would protect them with all her life. Loves kids, loves puppies. Yeah, that's her and her life-saving cape. But a lot of questions about Pyrenees. You see them all over on Montana ranches because people use them to protect the herds. And probably the coolest thing is they keep the bears and the predators away because they're super, super smart. Yep, Huck's way smart. Huck is way smart. Yeah, she's a good girl. And she's a good pup. Yeah, you're a good girl. It's like it's bred into their system. And then when they're outside, they're always looking. And they're really never off duty per se. They're always looking for things that aren't bad. But they'll also chase a deer. Friends, Missing 411 National Parks, available right now on Amazon and iTunes. You can rent it now. Please watch it. Post a review. We need the reviews. We need the reviews bad. And yeah. And we still have a few National Park sweatshirts available. Go to missing411.com. Find them there. Today's show is going to be a little different. Yes, a little different. No, we're going to talk about issues that confound us in the Missing 411 world. I'm going to read you some stories today. That's why it's going to be a little different. No, not from viewers. These are news stories. First one comes from October 1949 from Redding, California. A couple things. We've talked a lot about dogs being with people when the people disappear. And sometimes the dogs come back. Most of the times they do. And then sometimes the dogs aren't found till the people are found. I've been somebody who believes that if you go in the woods, the dogs are going to stay with you, dead or alive. Dogs can't stay if you're not around. And here's a story that exemplifies that. Dog stands guard over lost child at Wonderland. Laddie may be an ordinary dog to a lot of people, but out around the Wonderland district, he's the hero of the day. Laddie's claim to fame came one day last week when, and this is dated October 19th, 49. Claim to fame came one day last week when Jamie Ravencroft, his 20-month-old constant companion, came up missing. Jamie just wandered off in the bush, became tired, and decided to lay down and take a nap. But his parents, Mr. and Mrs. R.J. Ravencroft, and Laddie's owners, Mr. and Mrs. Vernon Tanham, aunt and uncle of Jamie, didn't know about Jamie's decision. They and neighbors started a search for the lost boy. Then someone discovered Laddie was missing too. Searchers started calling the dog, and finally they could hear his bark in the distance. They followed the sound until they came upon Laddie and Jamie 1.5 miles from the home. A camera-wise neighbor shot Laddie and Jamie as they were found by searchers. This is a good shot. And this kind of exemplifies what I'm telling you. Dog just standing there looking at the boy. Unbelievable. I saw a segment the other day about dogs. and about how smart they are. And until recently, nobody had really given the dogs a huge study. How much can they learn? What's their breadth of knowledge, loyalty, etc.? Turns out the dogs are really smart. And the smarter dogs have a mindset of like a 2 to 5 year old. That's about as far as they can get. But the point was being is that you could teach dogs a lot if you really took your own time with them from the very beginning. And they, like a young child, can develop the most when they are young. So in that first year that a puppy is growing, it's where you just teach them everything you can. I think it was a fascinating study. Actually, I don't watch this show very often, but it was on 60 Minutes. And a psychologist had a dog that he had trained since it was very young. And it was about how many words, hundreds of words, that this dog knew. And he demonstrated it for the audience by putting 100 different toys out in a field and telling the dog one at a time which toy to get, and that dog knew. Wow. Unbelievable. Now, go back to Great Pyrenees and Huck. And this is well known amongst Great Pyrenees forums. Sometimes Huck will be sitting there and I'll say, "Hey, come here." And she'll look at me and she'll just turn their head. They're known for being stubborn and doing things at their own rate. And sometimes when they walk into a new area, they'll just bark. And I've heard from some super smart people that's inbred in them as a protection mechanism to let predators know they're in that area. Stay away. It's not that they see anything. They'll just do it. Last year, I was at a kind of a carnival, but there wasn't rides or anything. It was in Libby, Montana. I took Huck with me. And it was outdoors, and we walked around. She doesn't care. She doesn't bark at people, not mean at people or anything. And there's probably over 2,000 or 3,000 people walking around this area, and it was all like, they were serving food, and it was about home improvement, and it was an Amish fair. And as we're walking around, this Pyrenees, I'm saying it was at least double the size of Huck. It was a male. It was huge. And it was walking loose. And I'd seen it earlier in the field next to this fair kind of thing in Libby. And it slowly walked in. And it walked over to Huck, and they smelled each other, and they both kind of greeted each other. And she's probably going, "Oh my gosh, what's this giant?" Very calm. And that's the other thing with Pyrenees. They'll be very calm under the most dangerous kind of conditions because they'll size it up and they'll think it through. And you can almost see that they're thinking. They're not really good to be search dogs because they have this stubborn streak in them. Sometimes they just don't want to do it, and there's nothing you're going to do. And that's one thing I learned from people who had Pyrenees when Huck was really young is don't get frustrated if they show stubbornness. And I learned that. And her and I have this relationship where I get it. But that's a little bit about dogs and people. And I truly believe that if a dog comes back from somebody they left with, people aren't there. Now, I was doing some research on missing people, and I came across this long story written by a guy who did search and rescues in the 1800s. I started to read the article, and I got mesmerized by it. And I said, my audience needs to hear this. because this is unusual. The story was a lost child, and it was in the Waterbury Democrat, April 2nd, 1894. Bear with me. Part of it's hard to read, but bear with me. It starts, I saw in a Pacific Coast newspaper an account of a lost child. It brought freshly to my mind a search for a lost child in which I participated 10 years ago. It was the only case of the kind which I ever had anything to do with. Children are often lost in large towns and cities to the alarm and the grief of parents. But the straying of a child to a place thronged with people is not so serious a matter as is the wandering away of a little one into the boundless wilds of an unsettled country. The police are notified, advertisements inserted in daily newspapers, and someone is pretty sure to have found and taken care of a little one until it's in the arms of the parents, except in the rare cases of kidnapping. In wild regions, however, when a child is known to be lost, it is necessary to organize search parties and scour the country for miles in all directions. Times haven't changed. Nothing more quickly arouses the people of a settlement in one of our western wilds than the news that a child has been lost. Still true today. The sympathy of even the most solid in the community is awakened. In isolated settlements, all are drawn together in a sort of class or large family, each member in which is familiarly acquainted with every other member, both great and small. This being the case when a child is lost one of the families of such a community, it is only necessary to mention the name to bring in unimaginable resources. Besides, there will be scores of persons who have fondled and dandled the missing little one, looking into the innocent eyes and listening to its pretty prattle. My experience in hunting for a lost child was had in Iowa in 1851. It was one known by the Wapsie-No-Neck, White Earth Creek settlement, halfway between Muscatine and Iowa City. To the southward was a heavy body of timber, a mile or two in width and extending for 30 miles along the creek, the Wapsie-No-Neck, while to the west and north lay wild and boundless prairie. One night in October, I was aroused by a cry of hello, hello in the house. It was about 10 o'clock at night. Springing out of bed, I raised a window and sang out, hello. The voice said, a child is lost, William Henderson, little Lizzie. They missed her about sundown, and since then we have been searching everywhere. Come and bring help, you can. I'm going to carry the news to the other neighbors in this direction. And the man, a neighbor whose voice I saw, recognized and galloped on. So I've talked about this in searches before. In those days, one person would be the messenger, and he would go house to house, ranch to ranch, farm to farm, telling people, hey, you need to go here, you need to go there, just like he told this, and right on to the next one. And that's how they got resources to gather. Didn't have phones. The farm of William Henderson was 2 miles away on the edge of a boundless prairie lying to the north. My brothers and every man in the house turned out and began dressing, for all heard the alarming news and all knew of the lost child, a little 4-year-old. Without waiting to go out upon the prairie to catch up horses, we all struck out on foot for the Henderson farm. How many people today would hike 2 miles in the middle of the night to go save a child? No cars. And the horses were let loose on the prairie at night to eat, and then they'd come back in the morning. So he didn't want to go look for me. He'd just say, all my brothers and I will just take off. We found the house filled with women. Mrs. Henderson was wild. She was determined to rush forth into the prairie despite the darkness of the night. The wolves were her constant cry. The wolves will kill my poor child. 20 women were present and all nearly as frantic. The house was a perfect piece of bedlam. It was not without reason that the mind of the mother was filled with fear of wolves. At that time, the prairies were full of coyotes, bands of which nightly prowled about the outlying farms, ready to sleep in and carry off lambs or fowls. When intent upon the thieving, they are quiet enough, but if balked by the flashing of lights or an unusual commotion, they stand off at a distance and yelp out their disappointment and anger. This evening, hundreds of brutes, owing to their stir about the farm, had been particularly noisy and indignant. The howls and yelps were torture to the poor mother. Some boys had 2 or 3 times gone out into the prairie, back to the fields with dogs, but the wolves were in such force that each time turned and followed the dogs in as soon as the boys turned about. Wherever the wolves began yelping, the mother would make a rush for the door, but 4 or 5 women who were resolved themselves into a sort of bodyguard always pulled them back. As the mother was an unusually large, strong woman, these struggles were so fierce as so frightening that 15 to 20 youngsters collected at the house and set all the screeching to the top of the wolves. After witnessing a skirmish of 2 of that kind mentioned, and being unable to obtain any useful information at the house, we beat a retreat. The men were all out in this stretch of the prairie and the east of the farm. Toward them we hastened. Before us was a beautiful sight. Not only all the farmers, but all the residents of the little village of West Liberty had taken to the field. About 60 men on horseback, each with a huge torch, were seen moving slowly across the prairie. They swept over a wide swath and went out a mile into the fields. They would turn and form back again over the new ground. In order not to trample the child under the feet of the horses, they did not move out of a walk. At the fields, a number of old men were splitting up fencer rails and making torches. Thus they were going over prairie nearest the house, foot by foot. Again, things haven't changed. The unusual sight stirred up impetuous coyotes, and they could be frequently heard yelping at the prairie to the northward of the farm, quite heedless of the gun and the pistol shots that were raised their infernal howl. The father of the lost child was among the mounted men. He was calm, but his face looked like that of a dead man in a glare of a torch. We had failed to obtain any useful information at the house, and when the father came back to the fence where the torches were renewed, a cousin who was with me approached him. "Mr. Henderson," he said, "keep up your courage. Your child will be found. If not tonight, when? Surely very soon after daylight." "What kind of shoes did she have on?" He stated, "A pair of little buckskin moccasins," the father. "This is all I wanted to learn," said my cousin. "Take courage, Mr. Henderson." My cousin then went to a man from the village who had a bullseye lantern, and borrowing it, started off alone in the direction of the house. This cousin of mine, Milton Moore by name, had recently returned from the prairies in Wisconsin, where for 3 years he had been lumbering on the Chippewa River. He was a great hunter, and had much among the Chippewa and the Winnebago Indians. In his hunting expeditions among the Indians with their young braves, he had become an expert in the art of trailing. I think few Indians could have beaten him. When he left with his lantern, I asked no questions. I know he was off on business. I also knew that he did not like questions. Although only 24 years old, he had the gravity and stoicism of a young brave. Hold on. Hope you're finding this interesting, because it is. As it was, he did not get the Indians out of him for about 3 years. He would every once in a while take his gun and slip away to join some roving band of Indian hunters, presently returning painted brave and adored with all the fiery of a young red Indian, every stitch of his civilized dress swapped off for fringed, beaded buckskin and many dollars given to boot. In about an hour, my cousin came back. A large bonfire of fence rails had been made near where I was standing. Seeing my cousin come into the edge of the circle of light, from the fire made me a sign. I went out with him and we withdrew into the dark. Well, what news? I asked. Bad, bad, he said. The child has gone into the hog pen. Great God. You don't mean to say that she has been devoured by the hogs? No, I hope not. I could find no fragments of her dress, but if she escaped the hogs, I fear she is drowned at the side of the lot where the hogs are penned, in a slough about 10 feet deep. I found the child's tracks in the lane leading to the house out of the prairie. The tracks turned and followed the fence to the field. Then she crawled through a fence and went toward the well inside the hog pen in a corner of the fence. Then I lost the track. Don't let the father know. Take a lantern and half a dozen men, then quietly slip away, rig some kind of grappling hooks, and examine the well. If you don't find the body in the well, search every part of that lot for scraps of the child's dress. I shall go southward along the line in the cell, and it came out of the pen alive. I hope somewhere to gain and find those little moccasin tracks. Important here. This really is about a professional tracker. He's that good. And he lost the tracks in a muddy pen. How did that happen? Sounding showed that the slough well to the contain only 4 feet of water. I would wait for no grappling hooks. Taking a rail from the fence to use as a ladder, I slipped off my clothes and descended to the bottom of the well. It was a cold bath, but I examined every inch of the well's bottom and found nothing but a drowned pig. This relieved our minds all the thoughts of the well. While I was dressing, 2 men with me took the lantern and began searching the corral, a lot of half an acre containing about 60 wild hogs and some unrecognizable prairie breed. While looking for shreds of clothing, the men were also to look for blood on the jaws of some of the hogs who were white-haired. Stooping and groping up to my neck in water had so chilled me that I left the examination of the lot to the others and bent my course toward the bonfires a quarter-mile away. Just before reaching the fires, I met my cousin. Said he, "All looks well again. The child came out of the hog pen all right. I have found the prints of her moccasins in 3 places in the dirt thrown out of the gopher holes. She is following the main line of the fence southward among the cornfields of the different farms, crawling back and forth through the fence. I left her track in the cornfield of her uncle John Lewis. What I want you to do is call off the horsemen who are working southward over the prairie. I want nobody to go in that direction to obliterate the trail I'm following. Make the father understand this. Tell him if I left myself, I will find this child. To convince him that I know what I'm about, give him those threads which I found in places where the little girl had crawled through the fence." and he gave me 3 or 4 bright woolen threads from a fringed hood worn by the child. That guy's good. I went towards the half-dozen bonfires blazing on the edge of the prairie while my cousin hurried away southward. It was now about 1 o'clock in the morning and so cold that groups of men were huddled about the fires. The horsemen came in when I announced the news of the tracks. The child had been found far to the southward of the hog pen. "The hog pen!" cried the father. He had been kept in ignorance of the child having been trailed into the corral. When fully informed of what had been related above, the father cried out, "Thank God that she passed there in safety." Soon afterward he said, "But are you sure her tracks have been found beyond the blot?" "Yes, sir," said I. "Here are your threads from the child's hood found in the places where she crawled through the cracks in the fence." The father clutched the threads, kissing them, placed them in his pocket. "I am convinced," said he, being informed by the cousin's wishes. Mr. Henderson then asked all discontinue the search until further orders. The horsemen dismounted, tying their animals to the fence, gathered about the fires. Fence rails were heaped upon the bonfires as freely as thought. They had ordinary cordwood. The men brought corn from the adjoining fields and perched it on the cob, either by hurrying the ears in hot embers or by toasting them on a stick. Arrowfuls of corn were also brought out by the horses. One seemed to in a camp of Missouri Jayhawkers. Men on foot and on horseback had been coming in all night, and a considerable number were still arriving. Some from farms 5-10 miles distance. Altogether, 300 men, and young and old, were in the field. They were representatives of about 20 families, all nearly related to the lost child, with old Enoch Lewis and Quaker grandfather at the head. News was sent to the mother that the child had not gone out into the prairies, that her tracks were being followed southward along the cornfields and the farms surrounding the village of West Liberty. This was news to the would-be believe her mind of a This was news that would be relieve her mind from fear in the packs of the wolves that had been yelping in the prairie in the northwood. The cowardly brutes would not venture southward past the bonfires and crowds of men. About 2 a.m., I stole away from the camp and went in search of my own cousin. I followed the main fence leading south. I came to where the fence formed a dividing between Gregg and Bozarth farms, but still had not found my man. Climbing the fence of the Gregg farm into a great cornfield, I again moved along the fence line of the southern fence. I'd gone about 10 rods when I was brought to a halt by the voice of my cousin. The light of the lantern had long been straining my eyes to see. "Well, which way?" said he. I looked about me on all sides, but in the dim starlight could see no one. "Here," my cousin said, "sit down," stooping. I peered into the fence corner and found my man lying among the grass and weeds. "What are you doing here in the dark?" "Waiting. My lantern went out just here." "Well, why don't you come up to the camp and get another? If that child is not found soon, she may chill to death." "Oh no, she has over her dress a good thick cloak. Her father told me that. She's all right. She's found." "Found? Where is she?" "Not far away. She's taking another sow." Sometimes it's hard to read. "Good Lord, you lying here and taking a nap while her father, mother, and all her people are about. Where's that poor little thing?" "Somewhere out there in the cornfield. I have not seen her yet." "If you haven't seen her, how do you know where she is?" "I'll tell you how I know. I tracked her out of Uncle John's cornfield to this cornfield in the Gregg farm. She first went up a little ways into the prairie. I don't know how far, but turned back to the fence, as I was sure she would. For the rise in the prairie, they would be almost before dark became blank," whatever that meant. "She would turn about in search of some object familiar to her, and seeing the fence would come back to it. Just ahead was the cross fence in the field, which would bar her way. So I came on and soon found where she had crawled through it, leaving behind a little woolen mitten." They're on the track when they find that. "I trailed her along the lines of the fence to this spot where she turned into the cornfield, and I had not followed her 10 feet before my lantern went out, and I just halted here on the trail and curled up to the fence corner to wait till daylight." "But how do you know where she's alive and sleeping?" "Well, half an hour ago I heard her cry for a moment, just as children do at times when disturbed. In the sleep I started up, but as she ceased crying almost immediately, I laid down again with my ear to the ground. About daylight, when the little breeze starts up, it will be colder and she will cry again. Then I may go get her. If not, I'll find her as soon as the light's enough to see the trail. She is not 200 yards from this spot, but I don't know the direction exactly." "You take things very coolly. Let's go and get another lantern." "No fear of her death from the cold. Those little prairie youngsters are very hot-blooded. I've not found it cold lying in the weeds and grass. I told the father I find his child, and I'm not going to have all the rabble rushing down here, tearing through the corn like that man. Now go back to camp. About daylight, let the child's uncle, Chad Lewis, come on in his horse and cross the fence. Then you come on in here and we'll get the child. But the father, what shall I tell him? Give him this little mitten. Tell him that I found it on the lost trail, and he shall have the child before sun is an hour high. but tell him to keep this news to himself and remain quietly at camp. If the men up there want to ride about the prairies, let them. I don't want a crowd down here in this cornfield." I went back to camp and, taking the father aside, gave him the little mitten and as much comfort as I could. A great fear that his girl was dead immediately crashed upon him. "However, no," said I. "She is sleeping quietly enough." "Quietly sleeping? How do you know that?" For answer, I repeated what my cousin had told me. When I mentioned that the crying of the child, the father wanted at once to rush away to my cousin. "No, let him go on his own cool, slow, and sure way. You'll make him nervous and hasty." Next, I sought out Clark Lewis. By the time I told him what was required of him, signs of dawn were visible to the east. He wished to set out immediately, and while he was getting his horse, I borrowed a lantern containing half a candle in order to begin the trailing at once. Clark Lewis halted at the fence while I went on and joined my cousin, where he was literally and very comfortably camped on the trail. He was glad to see the lantern, being tired of doing nothing. Besides, he had again heard the voice of the child for a moment. It was about had its sleep out, and it's beginning to fret because of the cold, he said. I wanted to rush ahead with the lantern and prosecute the search regardless of the trail. "No," said my cousin, "for I am not sure of either distance or direction, except that the faint wailing cries came from the eastward, slow and sure of the plan." The old-fashioned tin lantern was found in a poor thing for our use. It was only by opening the door of it that a sufficiently broad light for trailing could be obtained, and then it fell far short of the bullseye. Between the news of the corn and the ground was covered with pumpkin vines, foxtail grass, and weeds of various kinds, I could see nothing. My cousin, however, saw everything. When shown how I could see a pumpkin vine had been dragged out of place by the tired feet of the little one, but I could not see the moccasin prints and failed to note bent and crushed seeds. As the ground was thickly covered and hidden by most places, it was practically by what he saw among the weeds and plants that my cousin followed the trail. It was slow work, but by flashing the light ahead to where he had been dragged or a corn blade broken off, we occasionally went forward 10 feet at a bound. The trail, too zigzagged about, did not go straight ahead between the two corn rows. "She cannot be far," he said. "She has been here wandering in the dark." Darkness came upon her about the time she turned away from the fence. All looked like to her, or she would have held to the mark which was guided her so far, the fence. Daylight found us puzzling over the windings of the trail. In electricity, it reminded me of the trails of the opossums I had followed in boyhood. Not a sound that we heard from the child. This worried me, as I feared that she had chilled to death. "Nothing of the kind," said my cousin. "She has heard us and is lying low. She is in a condition to be afraid of every noise she hears." Sunrise came and we made better progress. This trail had turned and was leading back toward the fence. My cousin, who was about 10 feet in advance, suddenly turned and motioned me to move forward. When I came up to him, he pointed in silence to a spot about 3 steps beyond where we stood. There, in the midst of the mass of pumpkin vines, I saw the lower part of a child's dress, but her head had the upper part of her body were hidden under some large vine leaves. The sight gave me a great shock. "My God," I cried, "is she dead? My poor child has perished." The sound of my voice came up to the child's head. For a moment she stared at us with wild eyes. Pay attention to this. Then, all fours, she began to scuttle away, keeping her little body close to the ground, like a cat when in pursuit of game. In a moment, my cousin had her in his arms. She clawed and fought him like a little wildcat, but not a word or sound escaped her lips. She had got back to within 50 yards of the fence. As we carried her out of the field, we tried to soothe her, but she would not speak, and was constantly struggling to escape. When we had carried her to her Uncle Clark, who was waiting at the cross fence, Andy told her he would take her to Pop's. The wildness came out of her face at once, and she cried. My papa, was her father's pet. And it was afterwards found that it was in search of him that she had bundled up and sallied forth, knowing that he had gone to a neighbor's near the village. When halfway back to the camp, we came to the father who, seated upon his horse, was waiting to hear from us. The child had hidden its face against the uncle's bosom, and seeing it carried out that way, the poor man thought it was dead. Dead, dead, cried the man. My poor little Lizzie is dead. Oh, I feared it. Dead, cried the uncle. No, 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 she is not. She is very much alive as a little wild cat. Imagine the dad. In a moment, Lizzie was in her father's arms and almost smothered with kisses. Still, she looked rather wild-eyed and would not speak farther than an occasional murmur fondly, Papa, my papa. Wild were the cheers that rent the air when we arrived in camp. Cheer upon cheer. Then a half dozen young men rushed to their horses, and there was a wild race across the prairie to carry the news to the mother and those who were all night waiting up at the house. Whooping like wild Indians, they thundered along, spurring with their heels and smitting the flanks of their horses with their hats. The shouts sent up to the camp a mile away. We heard the house, and the half-crazed mother all at once misinterpreted it, crying, My child is dead. Hear the shrieking. They found her lying dead, said the mother. They are cheering. The child is safe. That was only when the crowd of the young horsemen came flying in, and the report to the mother allowed her to believe that her child was safe. The crowding about of so many men and their wild cheering so frightened the lost girl that she clung to her father's neck and hid her face in the bosom. Then all of a sudden caught the excitement of the moment, and spurring his horse, dashed homeward about as wildly as the young men who had preceded him. Dan DeQuille, Salt Lake Tribune. Now, what about that? I've heard before, but this is actually one of the best first-hand accounts of anything I'd heard like this. There's a thing that kids do sometimes when they're out in the woods and it's dark. What do kids do when it gets dark? They go to sleep. Very few children will hike or walk when it's dark. They'll find a place, they'll cuddle up, they'll go to sleep. Most kids are afraid of the dark. They don't want to be walking in the dark. And I've heard many times the kids won't address somebody's voice they don't know. And how many times have I heard searchers say, oh, we don't want parents or friends to be looking for kids during the search? Might be a fatal flaw in the search. The part where she had the wild look in her eye and crawled on all fours and had a wild look, that's pretty weird. I've never heard that before. Do I believe his account? Oh yeah, I do. Very strange though. But the real reason I read that to you, it's from 1894. That's when it was written. But the incident happened in the 1850s. And isn't it a sad state of affairs that searching hasn't really grown much with the technology that's available? Just lately, when a pilot was lost in Iran, they had to bail out of their jet. And then the CIA found him by using special technology, saying that they heard a heartbeat out in the woods where he was. On X, I wrote, if we have this technology, that's so advanced to find people, why don't we use it to find missing people? Why are they keeping this so secretive? I don't understand. If we could be saving lives with it, shouldn't we be using it? Well, friends, Lizzie was found alive. Thank goodness. And thank you for being here. I'm surprised Huck's not snoring. I could see her. She kind of moved under the camera now. She's kind of looking back at me. But kindness is key. Doesn't cost anything. When you're somewhere, try not to take good people for granted. Waiters, waitresses, truck drivers, a clerk at a gas station. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I've had hundreds of people in the last couple months tell me that they were forcibly unsubscribed. Please make sure you are. Paulides out.